So firstly, I'd like to thank all the listeners who have taken out time from their Saturday nights to attend this session. Mindsperm is an initiative that took birth in the minds of some batchmates of my YF 2019 to be able to go back to our classes and learn while sitting at home. We've successfully conducted 3 sessions and we love the response that we got from you guys. We hope you like today's session as well. I would especially like to take this opportunity to thank Purushottam sir, whom we have had the honor to even learn during a YF. And now we have another session with him, which is like a bonus thing that we never thought we will be able to have. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Professor Purushottam Agarwal is an academic, columnist, and literary critic who has also been a former member of Union Public Service Commission, UPSC. He's a visiting faculty at Ashoka University and has also been a professor at JNU and Ramdas College. An active social activist and consultant, Professor Agarwal served as chief advisor of the Peaceful Coexistence in South Asia project of Aman Trust. His illustrious career also includes him being the chairperson of Center of Indian Languages, School of Language, Language and Cultural Studies, JNU. He's also been a visiting professor at Colegio de Mexico and a British Academy visiting professor at Cambridge, UK, along with being a fellow of Wilson College, Cambridge. Apart from this glorious academic career, I've had the honor to attend professor's class in Ashoka University myself last year. And he's one of the professors who has left a huge impression on me with his candid conversations and the various perspectives he brings in a discussion. He most certainly has been one of the most eloquent and unapologetic professor we have had the honor to get learned from and to question everything with rationality. Given the chaotic times that we're all living in and the global pandemic, which has made all of us question the society and the systems that we're operating in, and the daily facing of such extreme reactions from various countries' governments to tackle this virus, we at Mindsperm feel it's our utmost privilege to hear from Purushottam sir about his take on the same. Our various institutions like our government, media houses, capitalistic corporates leading our idea of development in the wrong direction, or some important aspect of development is being overlooked. To explore this question, I would now hand over the sir to talk to us about this on a topic named Rethinking Common Sense in Times of Corona, post which we'll engage in a question answer session with him. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Apurva. Thank you very much for the kind words. And I'll just start this by recalling that I was invited to talk about communalization of COVID-19. That actually is the part of common sense or result of the common sense, which I think we need to interrogate. It's clearly like reacting to an agenda set by certain forces. They do not want you to talk about the plight of migrant labor. They do not want you to talk about the structural character of the crisis and response to it. And therefore, they create a situation in which you end up reacting to the things which they want you to react to. So you end up either defending everything, or you sound up dismissing all the allegations, and it's a zero-sum game. And therefore, I think it is extremely important, whether it is COVID-19 or it is something else, it is extremely important to kind of creatively react to a situation, proactively react to a situation, instead of just reacting to the agenda given to us by the powers that be. And that is why I insisted that I will not be talking about communalization of COVID-19. I would be talking about rethinking or reconsidering the very common sense from which this kind of responses emerge. And I would like to start by reading something which Immanuel Wallerstein, a leading social scientist and an activist also at the same time, wrote in 1999, 21 years ago. That year he published a book with a very interesting title, and the book was, and I hope, I request all of you to please go through that book. The title of the book was The End of the World as We Know It, Social Science for the 21st Century. That was published in 1999. On the very first page, Professor Wallerstein says, and I quote, "The modern world system as a historical system has entered into a terminal crisis and is unlikely to exist in 50 years. However, since its outcome is uncertain, we do not know whether the resulting system or systems will be better or worse than the one in which we are living. But we do know that the period of transition will be a terrible time of trouble, since the stakes of transition are so high, the outcome so uncertain, and the ability of small inputs to affect the outcome so great. This is what he wrote in 99. Now I just want to underline two things here. First, the ability of a small input to affect the outcome is so great. And in that sense, this small input organized by you young friends, it might have great impact. It might have the great ability to affect the outcome. And therefore, I really congratulate you for this initiative. Secondly, the question is of the system, the world system. I mean, frankly speaking, if you go by mortality rate, Corona or COVID-19, going by the strictly by mortality rate, it has a very low mortality. And yet it has created a havoc for the life of everyone on the planet. Why? That is the question we need to ask. Also keeping in mind that epidemics and pandemics historically have provided an opportunity to rethink, to restart things, because they in a way reflect the limitations at that particular moment in history, the limitations of our systems and our imaginations. So humankind has to rethink about many things which it was taking for granted up to that particular point. So if you look at the whole thing from this perspective, COVID-19 is different from all other pandemics in one crucial aspect. So far, the pandemics were the affairs of the poor, marginalized, at worst of the middle classes. I mean, just think yourself that just a few weeks ago, could anybody ever imagine the Crown Prince of United Kingdom suffering from an infection? And his Prime Minister, who was a great votary of herd immunity initially, and did not bother to disturb the system, did not bother to challenge the superstition of minimal government, and hope that herd immunity will take care of everything. I mean, I should not say that I am happy, but in fact, I am rather happy that the gentleman himself ended in ICU, because he conveniently forgotten that herd immunity might leave even people like him outside. Could you imagine that the president of US will be tested twice for some kind of virus infection, and the wife of Prime Minister of Canada will have to undergo a treatment? The members of royal family of Saudi will have to undergo treatment. Could you imagine this just a week ago? Because of an infection, because of a virus. This class of people so far was used to diseases like common cold to the emperor of maladies, or emperor of all maladies, that is cancer, or lifestyle conditions like blood pressure, diabetes, or cardiac arrest and all that, but not viral infection. So this is something very interesting. And also, at least in last 100 years, this is for the first time that the so-called first world is suffering from a viral infection. And that is why you can see the difference in response. Ebola, with a much higher mortality rate, did not receive the same kind of response from the world community, because it did not reach Europe, it did not reach North America. So, and what actually this infection has exposed? As I told you, mortality is not very high, but what it has exposed? It has exposed the criminal negligence of the public healthcare systems. Even in a place like USA, in a city like New York, more than 11,000 people are dead. In the entire US, around 37,000 people are dead. So obviously, the states have not been able to find an alternative better than partial or total lockdown. So many countries have gone in for the lockdown. And the result is obvious for everyone. The poor are the worst sufferers. In USA, more than 1.5 million people have lost jobs. More than 6 million are applying for unemployment benefits. In India, given the nature of our labor market, given the very prominent role being played by informal sector in our economy, it's very difficult to estimate. But people have estimated that around 12 crore people might have lost their jobs in this crisis. Then again, look at the response of the system. Migrant labor are being treated like dirt. So what I'm trying to tell you is this, that when we talk of these things, let us focus on some fundamental issues. And people have really seriously reflected, and they must reflect on the nature of the world after whenever this infection is over. Because let us be very clear about it, howsoever we may condemn technology, but let us be very clear about it that one, it is due to technology that we are having this conversation. This conversation won't be possible in the absence of technology, number one. Number two, it is because of the activities and evolution in medical science that sooner or later we will find some cure and some vaccine for this disease also, this infection also. But it has certainly changed things forever in a way. And therefore, that prediction of Wallerstein is very important, because that prediction focuses on system. He's obviously not predicting any pandemic or anything, but he's actually pointing out the basic nature of the system, and he's saying that the basic nature of system is such that it cannot survive beyond a point. He gives 50 years at the outer timeline. We are seeing his prediction coming true in 21 years itself. So therefore, it's important to reflect on the kind of system we are going to have after Corona world. And here, let me just recall that the popular historian Yuval Noah Harari wrote a piece in Financial Times of London, I think on 19th March or whatever, in which he expresses valid concern about the state going in for what he calls under the skin surveillance, and also about solidarity, global solidarity. Now, my question is that solidarity for what? I find it quite interesting and rather amusing in a way that in this article by Harari, words like capital, multinationals, world system, healthcare systems, these words and phrases are conspicuous by their absence in this article. And this has been a very popular article, hugely read world over. I find it amazing that these things do not figure in the article. He is rightly concerned about the state and the proclivity of a state of becoming more authoritarian, more intrusive. But is it only the state which is likely to become more authoritarian and more intrusive? Is it only the state? Is our personal life being monitored only by the state or also by Google and Facebook? Who is collecting our data? How it happens that when I visit a certain site on Facebook or I see a certain kind of thing, my Gmail account is filled with the advertisements pertaining with that particular thing? Is it a state? Or is it something much more powerful than the state? There is a novel written by an American author, Dave Eggers, The Circle. The Circle in that novel is an infotech giant, and which insists that community must know everything about everybody. Community obviously is the euphemism for the corporate bosses. In the novel, the point is that privacy is a theft. Why should an honest person insist on privacy? There is nothing private in your life. Everything needs to be shared. And mind you, this has been created, this has been made into a kind of mindset. Look at social media things, the kind of things people share, the kind of things people talk about. So the very idea of privacy is becoming something like, on one hand, privacy is a bad thing. On the other hand, demanding some kind of accountability from the state is all out of fashion. I think we need to think all these things. Privacy is a theft is not the motto of some states only, it's the motto of multinational corporations for obvious reasons. The nation states, many of the nation states are nothing in their power and capacity compared to multinational corporations. So when we talk of, we imagine this pandemic ironically has given us an opportunity to pause and to think about many things which we took for granted. For example, as I told you, the fact that rich and powerful of the world might suffer lifestyle diseases or some other kind of diseases, but a viral infection, no chance. But this has happened. This has happened. Rich and powerful are suffering from viral infection. Reasonably good health systems in Western Europe, like France and Italy, have collapsed. So the question is that what kind of state, what kind of healthcare system, what kind of accountability should we think of? I mean, I only recently read this book by Elizabeth Rosenthal, who is an MD from, medicine. She's a proper medical doctor. And she worked as a health correspondent for New York Times for quite some time. And she has written this book about the nexus of privatized healthcare in USA and the insurance companies. And she has aptly termed her book as American Sickness and American Sickness. And this is the model which many people in India have been advocating quite enthusiastically, in which healthcare is not a citizen's right and it's state's responsibility, it is a commodity. The state will at best subsidize this commodity for you. That is the essence of the much touted Ayushman scheme. It is insurance for 5 lakh rupees. It's not a guarantee from the state of providing minimal health care. So we have to think about all this. We have to think of having a state which is strong enough to provide support and to steer society in a certain direction, and yet which is accountable to people. In other words, post-corona world might be characterized by a conflict between democracy and corporatocracy. It might be characterized by a struggle of winning back the democratic state. Second thing which I think we must consider, obviously, I am here in USA, I do not know much, but I am seeing on social media many people are posting fascinating photos of Himalayan peaks being visible from Jalandhar and Yamuna in Delhi looking much cleaner and the water looking like real water instead of the poison carrying industrial waste. So, yes, environment. But again, in environmental concerns also, you cannot put, for example, Africa and USA on the same plane. The so-called American lifestyle is most responsible for environmental degradation. So we have to have some idea of redefining the very idea of development. And again, it becomes ultimately a political question, ultimately a question of the system. The powerful people in Western Europe and USA do not want to compromise on their lifestyle. But they want countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to be sensitive to environment. This will not work. You have to have a global perspective, and that global perspective will imply a moral responsibility and a real accountability on part of the people who are leading a lifestyle which actually has made Earth literally cry. But they are responsible. The systems are responsible. The system needs to be drastically changed and interrogated. Again, this is again a question of, democracy being turned into something else, just retaining the name democracy. If you look at the thing, it is very interesting that countries which have to a great extent successfully dealt with the crisis, for example, South Korea, Germany, New Zealand, and other countries, they are not ruled by heroic cult figures. And the countries ruled by heroic cult figures, their response is there for everyone to see. Starting from China, the Xi Jinping regime, and given the fact that China is, after all, an authoritarian political structure, a totalitarian structure actually, the game of hide and seek, denial, hiding the info from the world community. Then in USA, you have President Trump, who till some weeks ago was describing the whole thing as a democratic hoax. Government of India till 12th or 13th March was saying that COVID-19 is not a health emergency. And from 23rd March, India is under lockdown. So the moment you question the leader, you are anti-American, you are anti-national, you are anti-people, enemy of the people. This cult of personality going in the name of democracy. Look at media. You wanted me to talk about communalization of COVID-19. Who played the greatest part in communalization of COVID-19? Media. Without verifying events, without verifying news, fake news was circulated, run, and made into the most important point of discussion for days out and days in. How many discussions did you see on media on the plight of migrant workers? How many discussions did you see on the media about the plight of the so-called corona warriors? How many media people asked the Prime Minister that, okay, sir, the people will follow Saptapadi, will follow 7 great sutras of discipline. What government is going to do? What are the government plans? Is there any accountability? Do you have a health minister? You have a state in the country called Madhya Pradesh, which is one of the worst sufferers, and the state is being run by a one-man government. And his own health department has so many corona positive people. A senior officer, in fact, probably the health secretary, receives her son from USA, hides, does not let him be tested, and ends up having corona herself. Has any action been taken against her? Has media raised this question? And why so? Is it only a coincidence that at the moment, more than 50% of Indian media is being controlled by one business house? So is it a question of system or not? That there should be some systemic arrangement which prevents any business house or any corporate to control media like this and to manipulate, or as they say, manufacturing the consent for whatever is going on. So these are the questions of system. And when I say rethinking common sense, precisely this is what I mean. That instead of, and similarly, we were talking about environment. I mean, look at the idiom. We have done this, we have done that. Nature is taking revenge. This language converts a very real political problem into a kind of metaphysical sin story. Nature is not taking revenge. The system has led you to this situation. So we must think of system. We must talk about system, which means following things. Is not the neoliberal idea of globalization has proved to be a bust? I think on 1st of April in the New Statesman, the British political scientist John Gray wrote a very thought-provoking piece, in which he says that these popular superstitions of minimal government have proved to be superstitions, because the British government has been forced to use the authority to do certain things. Again, the question is, and forget about Corona, for example. When I came here and I noticed it during my last visit, that was in September, and then I was told that, yes, this is how it happens. I visited a Walmart store. As you know, these stores in America are huge. So I visited, along with my son Ritvik, I visited this Walmart store. And I noticed that all those who are there as helpers or as salespersons, there is no chair or no benches where they could sit. And I was told that it is the policy of Walmart. You cannot sit for 8 hours through. You are supposed to be on your feet. You are supposed to be active, quote unquote active, euphemistically active, available. Just imagine yourself standing for 8 hours without any place where you can sit and relax for a while. I would love to have a state which is formidable enough to tell the Walmart that this is not done. I would be very happy with a state which tells the private hospitals, at least in this kind of crisis, that this 5,000 rupees a test is not done. For this, Supreme Court has to intervene, and again, Supreme Court revisits its decision and says that it is only for the poor or lower income group. As a poor and lower income group can dare to enter a hospital like Apollo or Max. So my point is that when we talk of environment, we must actually talk of the proper understanding of development. Environment and its degradation, again, is ultimately a political question. It's a question of system. And it's the question of global system. It's very easy for USA to ask China and India to control its carbon emission. You have to imagine the kind of carbon emission these people do. You have to be here to see that. But that is American way of life. That cannot be challenged. And at least for the current president, just as coronavirus was a hoax, global warming is also a hoax. It's a bad news. It's a fake news. So these kind of things need to be challenged. And they can be challenged only through political processes. They can be challenged only through asking right questions. And then coming back, I remember this Harari thing. I mean, it seems that people are talking of some kind of revolution of soul. To my mind, this is illusion, Maya. And people like Kabir knew better. And therefore, when they talk of revolution of soul, they also talk of society outside. So change in your attitude, your sensitivity to nature, fine, fair enough. We must have change in our attitude. We must be more sensitive to nature. We must be more sensitive to people around. But we must also be assertive and interrogative so far as state is concerned. I must help my people. I must help poor around me. I must take care of the elderly, as the Honorable Prime Minister says. I completely agree with him. But may I request him to tell me that what the Indian state is doing for taking the care of elderly? Is there any special provision for them? Is there some responsibility, accountability of the state or not? What happened to the railway ticket concessions to the elderly? That was one of the first casualty of the post-corona order in India. And rest assured, it is not going to be restored, even after this corona thing is over. That is the problem when you become part of reducing everything into a kind of Maya, reducing everything into kind of just a question of individual morality. And that is what I said. You end up reacting to the agenda set by the powerful people. At the end, let me just tell you two things. One, I think any new and human system has to be rooted in what Gandhiji described as ahimsa. Gandhiji defines ahimsa as primarily of two constituents to him of ahimsa are crucial. One is the self-restraint, sanyam, and the other is karuna, that is compassion. So compassion means the care for other, and restraint means the care for self. For self in the sense that you please control your own desires and needs. The point, however, is that this principle of ahimsa needs to be converted into a principle of governance. And at the same time, we need to have a more just system of redistribution of resources. You call it socialism or you don't call it socialism, given its history and particularly given the record of the so-called existing socialism in former Soviet Union and present China, I realize that it has become a rather dirty world, or it has been made into a dirty world. But the fact remains that you call it socialism or you call it whatever you want to call it. The fact remains that a system based on fair redistribution of resources is a must. You know, Francis Fukuyama, who became famous overnight academic star with his book published in 1992, The End of History. The central thesis of that book was that liberal democracy or capitalism as a world order is the end of history. And all societies are heading towards it and must head towards it. That is the ideal. The American system is the ideal. And every society must inch towards it. In 2017 or I think 18, he published his latest book, A Study of Identity Politics. And giving an interview to a newspaper talking about this book, Fukuyama says that if you mean communism or socialism, if you mean redistribution of resources, then socialism must come back. Reaganomics, Thatcherite policies, I'm quoting Fukuyama, have done great harm to the world. We cannot just talk of minimal government, and we cannot just leave the world at the mercy of big business and multinational corporations. I hope we learn the lessons for the post-COVID-19 world. It has to be a democratic state. System has to be restructured. Things like healthcare cannot be treated as commodities. They are human rights. They are citizens' rights. And the state needs to be accountable to them. So there has to be a responsible and accountable state. In the context of our country, there has to be an inclusive nationalism, which does not stigmatize a particular community or a particular area or particular caste. And it is not just with reference to Corona, it is in general. At the very end, let me give you a very interesting example. Apurva just mentioned that I was a member of UPSC for 6 years. And as a member, I had the opportunity of living in, these huge government accommodations. For initial couple of years, we were living in the old Moti Bagh 1 or whatever it is called or it was called. These flats, these complexes were constructed in the early years of independence in the Nehru era. And in this complex, old Moti Bagh, there were flats or apartments of 4 bedroom for secretaries and so on. Big, huge apartments with lawns. But in the same colony, in the same locality, there were 1 bedroom flats in the same colony. So in the market, at least, it was quite likely that the secretary Sahab is buying his pan and some quote unquote lowly clerk or chaprasi is also buying the pan from the same shop or buying a packet of cigarettes or bili from the same shop. And they lived together, close by. Then, after a couple of years, we were shifted to New Moti Bagh across the street. And New Moti Bagh, if you happen to visit it, is I think at the moment, the most fancy locality in Delhi. And its features are, it is gated, entry is regulated, every bungalow is provided with 2 servant quarters, quite small. And then for the servants, there is a building outside the gated community, and servants have to enter the community only with the identity card. Within this gated community, there is a huge swimming pool, a wonderful recreation center, a market in which, of course, outsiders cannot enter. Unlike the old Moti Bagh market, which is one of the favorite markets of people in South Delhi, whether they live in Moti Bagh or they do not live in Moti Bagh. But in New Moti Bagh, you can use the market only if you are a resident or the guest of a resident. This is a metaphor of the way the Indian elite has imagined its world in the last 20 years. With the so-called liberalization and opening and globalization, this is the way Indian elite has imagined its world. And this is dangerous. And Corona will not spare New Moti Bagh. It will reach New Moti Bagh. In all probability, it will reach there first, because New Moti Bagh will be having more visitors from Western Europe and USA than any other place in the vicinity. So I think we must insist in whatever way we can on restructuring of the world order. And in our country, we must insist on inclusive nationalism and socially sensitive state policies. And therefore, it's important to reconsider or to rethink the common sense like minimum state or minimum government is the best. No, it is not. It is certainly not, particularly in a society like India. Media should be free. Yes, media must be free. No state control, of course. But just again, imagine, in this crisis, however it's drabness or whatever, DD at least cannot be accused of inciting communal violence. It cannot be accused of spreading deliberate fake news and organize so-called debates which are nothing but, and sometimes nothing but shameless expression of stupidity and sometimes open incitement to violence. The media is free because it is not controlled by a state. Doesn't matter if it is controlled by one single business house. No, that is not the idea of freedom. And therefore, I think, Apurva, now I think it is time for question answers.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So any question or comments or whatever. Yeah.
First of all, sir, thank you so much for such a thought-provoking session.
Thank you.
This has really given us all of us a food of thought. And for people who have been your students, it was like going back to the Golden Fellowship times. Thanks a lot for that. We do have a bunch of questions pouring in our YouTube comments.
Yeah.
And we do have some of the questions from the earlier times of registrations as well. I'll try to take up the questions that will cover as many aspects of the talk as possible.
Yeah.
The first question that came to us was, is the culture of increasing misinformation a natural consequence of the extensive uncertainty that people are living in, or is it because of something else? Why are people able to buy through misinformation without any other thought process?
Very good question. Yes, uncertainty is one factor, undoubtedly. When you are uncertain or when you are afraid of something, then you tend to, your critical faculty tend to become, less active. And you have a tendency to accept anything which comes your way. So this is certainly a factor in that. But again, apart from, along with this, again, we must go into the system or into the organization. I am told that in India, there are at the moment 40 crore WhatsApp accounts. And if a group, as we know, decides to spread a certain kind of fake news through WhatsApp, technology has made it extremely easy to do. And then you accept it, or many people accept it, and they spread it further. It develops a kind of, cascading effect. It goes on reproducing itself. Therefore, the point for people like you, for others also, but people like you, the point is that we must develop consciously a habit. I have been telling this since you remembered those YIF days. I have been telling that you must practice ekant every day, at least for 1 or 2 hours. You remember that?
Yeah.
No TV, no laptop, no social media, your lovely smartphone in off mode, and you are just alone with yourself, reading something, listening to some music, or just reflecting or sleeping. So you must practice that. You also must practice a certain kind of critical thinking. Don't take anything without some kind of basic reason, without some kind of basic evidence. Don't make yourself susceptible to every kind of fake news. Uncertainties are there undoubtedly, and they are not going to end very soon. So you have to make your personality, your individuality stronger, and to take these kind of uncertainties. And my personal advice would be that one very important thing which you can do is to develop a habit of reading more and watching television and social media as less as possible. So far as television is concerned, to my mind, it's positively a good health advice not to watch television. It will help you keeping healthy physically as well as mentally.
Noted, sir. So our next question is that by your conversation, what came to the forefront was that generally people in power or countries in power are what determine what narrative of the incident reaches to the people. And that is what shapes the public opinion. This means that our reactions and situations are also determined, and it's never by us, it's actually manipulated by those in power. And then we tend to focus on the agenda and just forget the bigger picture. How do we break this vicious cycle?
You see, here we must understand that we must understand the dialectical nature of things. And that is why I mentioned in the beginning that it is pointless to criticize or condemn technology in toto. We must understand that information technology has given immense power to regimes and corporates, but because of its very nature, it has given power to us also. I mean, if I have certain opinion and I want to express it, 20 years ago, I needed some kind of channel for that. Somebody would edit it, somebody would accept or reject it, right? Today, I can just put it on my Facebook account and ask other people to read it and circulate it. You write something interesting, and I have been doing this. If you follow my Facebook, I have been doing this mainly in last 1 month or so. I share at least 5 or 6 nice things every day. Some positive stories, some nice thought-provoking articles. So again, Apurva, the question is that how you use the technology. You see, the question is that whether you are able to sustain your fundamental vivek, fundamental capacity to reflect, to think, to discriminate. That is how you create that situation. Unless a state decides to go completely authoritarian and totalitarian, fortunately, that is not the case so far in India or in USA or in many places. If that happens, then it's a different thing altogether. But as long as this space is available to you, even if television is not available to you, newspaper is not available to you, and television or such kind of mass media is being used to create a certain kind of narrative, certain kind of common sense. That is why, my dear, the topic of this talk, rethinking common sense. And you can do this through social media, through this platform. I mean, just look at this. You organize this wonderful series of talks. I don't know how many people are watching it at the moment, but this is going to be on YouTube for a while. Just as previous talks are there. I watched a couple of previous talks which you had posted on YouTube. Now this is going to be there. Such things become a source forever. So use this. Information technology has given you also a certain level of power. Please use it.
Yes. So another question that came in, that apart from philanthropy and spreading awareness, what can we people with privilege do to actually help the narrative that is being built around, especially by the state or media, to make a biased agenda out of an issue?
Write as much as you can to these people and on your accounts and challenge them. And not only on this, again, Apurva, we must historicize everything and we must look at everything as a part of a historical process. Now imagine a situation. If people like you or people like me had collectively challenged the kind of stupidity being spread on television in 2016, when a character was saying that 2000 rupees notes carry an electronic chip. I would really love to have some young people research into the matter, that how many letters of protest were written to the owner of that channel. How many thousand people said that what nonsense you are spreading. I would love to know that how many letters of protest or how many rejoinders were written to the channel on which the great news was given that cow exhales oxygen. These kind of nonsense have been allowed to go unchecked. Look at the nature of these people. Look at the quote unquote strength and character of these people. Maharashtra government arrested one reporter for one night. The case was deliberately launched under such sections of IPC that the boy got the bail next day. He just spent one night in Hawala. And Mr. Rajas Sharma started talking of great virtues of Congress leaders who helped disperse that crowd at Bandra station. Rubika Liaquat Khan started talking about Muslims giving kandha to Hindu Arthij and organizing cremation. One particular gentleman stopped doing his show One particular gentleman at least temporarily disappeared from social media. This was the result of just one arrest and for one night. This is as simple as that. So this is what the state can do. Media freedom cannot be equated with the freedom of spreading fake news. You are most free to have your opinion. As I have been telling you in academics also, I insist on this. You remember? You can have your opinion. You just cannot invent facts. And for God's sake, please don't tell me that experience matters, evidence does not. No, to me, experience does not matter. To me, evidence matters. To me, argument matters. So similarly, create a pressure on these channels and these newspapers or whatever they are. Create a pressure. Look at social media these days. To its credit, Uttar Pradesh police has taken these things seriously in last 2 weeks or so. Look at the Twitter handles. People are disowning their past. People are declaring that we never wanted to do this. This is wrong and we apologize to our brethren and our sisters. एक झटके में सब सुधर गए. जरा सा एक रात भर के लिए हवालात में रहे एक जहाब तो बड़े बड़े पत्रकार सीधे हो गए. So that is what a state can do and it should do. I am very clear on that. Secondly, people like us, we should question these people. We should stop watch television and declare with a declared program that we will not watch this particular channel because it is fake news channel. So that is how you can intervene.
Being proactive about your choices and decisions.
Yes. And not only in this crisis, as I told you.
No.
Please ask this question to your friends at least, that how many of them protested on that utter stupidity of electronic chips in 2000 or 500 rupees notes and holy cow exhaling oxygens. How many of them protested against that?
I definitely will ask that. So my next question will be, this has all been about the problem aspect of the situation. If you look at the solution, you said that the neoliberal part of globalization model is a bust now. The system that we have been working, society have been working, it has shown to be a flop system. So what do you think can be a replacement for the same?
As I hinted you, what Francis Fukuyama says, just redistribution of resources, a system which ensures a just redistribution of resources, a state which is strong enough to take necessary measures and accountable enough to people, a state which is actually democratic state. I gave you the metaphoric example of New Moti Bagh and Old Moti Bagh. We must come out of this nonsense of creating islands of privilege. Yes, privilege is going to be there. I'm not against that. A top officer is going to have some privilege. Of course, he or she must have privileges. But this kind of isolation from society around. I mean, when Nehru regime created Old Moti Bagh, there were IAS officers even then. There were top bureaucrats even then. There were ministers even then. But they did not require a totally isolated, gated community to live. New Moti Bagh is a gated community. You cannot enter it unless and until somebody from the inside tells the Chowkidar that Apurva is my guest. Please allow her to come. You will not be allowed. Even if you speak very fancy English, even then you will not be allowed. Now talk about ordinary Indians. They cannot even dream reaching there. So you create these kind of islands of privileges and exclusion. I used an expression, please never forget that, Apurva. Inclusive nationalism. And inclusion, again, for God's sake, does not refer only to communities and castes and genders. There is a particular word which has become anathema to even liberal and so-called left commentators these days, and that word is class. So inclusion is not just inclusion of women, or inclusion of Dalits, or inclusion of Muslims. It is inclusion of Majdoors, inclusion of Kisans, inclusions of migrant labor. That kind of inclusive nationalism. So that is what I personally feel that we should fight for, and I have been fighting for that. Inclusive nationalism in that sense.
That will be quite an idealistic world if we are able to achieve that.
No. See, Whether we achieve that ideal or not, that is not important at all. What is important that we work towards that ideal. That's it.
Yes.
I cannot control the outcome of my act. I
And
can control only the nature of my input. I cannot
so
control the input. Yeah,
yeah.
please.
One of our second last questions. One of our readers, our listeners has asked, why is it that the contemporary India's common masses have bought onto the Hindutva ideology or are not based on value-based respect anymore? Why is there a growing intolerance, ignorance, and fundamentalistic attitude?
For that, I am sure you would realize, or you could have answered this question yourself. For that, we would, I think, need another session.
Yeah.
Why? It's a very important question and a very nice question, because the person who has asked has why in mind. Unfortunately, this why has been ignored by many commentators. Why?
Because we have had Hindus in our country for 70 years. Why suddenly this agenda?
Apurva, exactly. So there have been some anxieties. And all anxieties are not just constructed. There have been some real anxieties. You are absolutely right. The Hindutva ideology, if you go by the establishment of RSS, RSS was established in 1925, 95 years ago. Out of these 95 years, RSS was just a marginal presence for 75 years, or 70 years at least. In last 25 years, it has become the dominant political and ideological force. Why? So it's a very important question, and immediately after Kabir, that is going to be my next book. So,
we are looking forward to that.
We have to discuss it in some detail. I can only say that it's an important question. We all must think about it. Why it has happened.
Sir, I have one last question from you.
Yes, please.
Post which we can wrap the session. A lot of apprehension has been that post the COVID-19 period, people might question the democracy way of being and might advocate for totalitarian regimes, saying that they are able to go much more strongly towards an epidemic. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yes, that's quite a possibility. And that's not a spontaneous possibility, that's a constructed possibility.
Okay.
I mean, look at this campaign was launched on social media. It was a test case. The response was not as good as they expected. Otherwise, this would have caught force, and they will be launching it again, that there should be no election in 2024. And the current prime minister must continue for 10 years. And this is happening all over the world. In China, the current president has made himself president for life, virtually. The same has happened in Russia. So that is what I told you, that one of the dangers coming to democracy is from this obsession with cult figures. And again, this will be a good exercise for you, for young people like you. Can you tell me the name of the president or prime minister of Vietnam or of South Korea?
South Korea.
You just cannot. Right, like that, you will have to consult Google. And these are the countries, and Taiwan for that matter, these are the countries who have controlled COVID-19 the best way, particularly Taiwan and Vietnam. And you do not even know the names of their leaders, because their cult and leaders did not work. System worked. And it worked, and people expected the system to work. They did not go gaga just because the cult leader comes and gives a fantastic speech on television. Yes, that is a real danger. So again, the question is that a system of accountability, a formidable, strong state, but not an authoritarian, totalitarian cult figure. A state accountable to democratic norms and procedures and systems. So ask your friends, do they know the name of President Prime Minister of Vietnam? Or Communist Party General Secretary, or whatever the authority is there, or South Korea, or forever. I mean, South Korea is conducting elections even during this crisis. And people want to postpone elections in some places. So this is actually the real danger. And that is why I insisted that please create an agenda of democratic awareness instead of reacting to the agenda set by them. And please widen the meaning of the category inclusive. take it outside from the identity politics. All identities are important. They all must be included, undoubtedly, gender or caste or community, whatever. But what about the identity of labor? What about the identity of production? So what happens to Kisans? What happens to labor in your inclusive nationalism? That is my fundamental question.
Understood, sir. So now that we are towards the end of the session, is there any key takeaways that we can take away from your session, if that you would like to tell our listeners?
That you decide.
Of course, we will.
You see, I can only respond to this by saying this. कि सारी रात रामायण सुनी और सुबह पूछा कि सीता कौन था.
No, I do have my own key takeaways for sure. Thank you so much.
You have to decide what is the takeaway.
I'll actually tell my key takeaways right now. According to me, what you basically mentioned was that we have to definitely base our systems on Gandhiji's system of ahimsa, which is on compassion and self-restraint. And the systems have to be restructured and redesigned that is more inclusive for a national identity rather than for communal identity. And especially healthcare has not to be treated like a commodity. It has to be a common right for people. People should practice ekant so that they can stay away from all the hyperbole that media goes about.
They should reflect. They could reflect. Not just stay away. They could reflect.
They should reflect and critical think.
They should read nice things, particularly young people. They should read nice things, and they should read everything critically. And
we should use our privilege to hold everybody accountable for their actions.
Yes.
We have to be very proactive about this.
Yes.
Understood, sir. Thank you really much for a fantastic session. I'm sure it gives all of us a lot to think about and to take away home. Specifically to the viewers who have listened to us till so late night, we are very grateful to you for taking out your time and considering us to be an important part of your Saturday night. Mindsperm has now partnered with Sangh, which is a fundraising initiative by the current batch of YF, for helping people who have suffered because of the lockdown. Follow their page on Instagram, Sangh COVID YF19, to donate. With this, I would like to wrap up today's session. We have another great lecture tomorrow coming up by Professor Debayan on the topic, Trajectory of Pandemic in India, Understanding the Data and Building an Effective Policy. Do share, follow and subscribe to our YouTube and Instagram channel, and from this we'll continue bringing such amazing professors to your doorstep. Again, thank you so much, Professor Purushottam. It was a privilege and an honor to have you here.
Thank you very much, Apurva.
And I hope your quarantine time goes really well in America.
Yeah. It's not quarantine, it's ekant. I don't use the word quarantine. I'm enjoying this ekant. I'm using this most creatively.
That's a great way to look at it. Till next time, good night. Bye, everybody. Stay inside, stay safe.
Bye. Wish me good day, not good night.
Good day, sir.
Okay, Apurva. Bye. Okay, dear.